The question is who makes our medical decisions, who makes our financial decisions, and who lets our dog out? Which sounds silly, but my wife's gonna be more worried about our dog than she is me, I swear. Like, she tells me she wouldn't, but I know the truth. But, like, that's the type of things that kids would normally do that you need to figure out a system to take care of for you.
Welcome to Real Money, Real Life, the podcast where we get real about money and the messy human stuff that comes with it. I'm Linda Grizzly, financial educator and your Me Money guide to financial clarity. Each week, we dive into financial concepts and money strategies, but we always tie it back to real life, emotions, mindset, and how money actually shows up day to day. If you're ready for practical tools, mindset shifts, and honest conversations that meet you where you are, not where the world thinks you should be, you're in the right place. Because you deserve to feel confident with your money and good about how you use it. No judgment, no lectures, no lingo, and definitely no putting yourself last. Hello, everyone. If you're listening, you're one of the real ones, the ones questioning the shoulds about money and choosing to build a life that fits you, not anyone else's rulebook. This episode is going to focus on financial planning and life design for child-free individuals, including unique challenges, planning opportunities, and how to think about legacy, healthcare, and financial decisions without the traditional kids will take care of me safety net. We also discuss the mindset shifts needed to embrace a child-free lifestyle with confidence and clarity. Today's guest is Jay Zigmont. He is the founder and CEO of Childfree Wealth and Childfree Trust. Childfree Wealth is an SEC RIA dedicated to serving child-free people. Childfree Trust enables child-free people to appoint a trust company to serve as their medical POA, financial POA, executor, and trustee, effectively acting as their next of kin. Dr. J is a certified financial planner, child-free wealth specialist, and author of the books Portraits of Child-Free Wealth and The Child-Free Guide to Life and Money. Dr. J is the co-host of the Child-Free Wealth podcast. So welcome, Jay.
Thanks for having me. I had to laugh when you're talking about shoulds because that's the core argument of like what you should do in life versus being child free. And is that the right path? Like, boy, is that the big question.
Yeah. And I talk a lot about that because my niche that I focus on my audience is women, and there's a lot of shoulds for us too. So I'm all about the shoulds. And I think that being child free is sometimes something that people think is, sets them apart and makes them different. But really, everybody has their shoulds.
Well, so when I started about 4 years ago now, when I took my CFP, there was never once a mention in any of the education of being child free. It just doesn't exist. And I was like, well, my wife and I are child free. Are we just weird? And come to find out, it's about 25% of the US that are child free or permanently childless. So really, we're weird in the general population. But when you look at, hey, there's 50 million other folks out there like us, it's not so weird.
Right? It's not at all. I have several friends that are child free, and I think that they always kind of feel left out of conversations. But, there's conversations I feel left out of too sometimes. So I think there's always something for us. So other than going through the CFP course and realizing that there wasn't training on that, like there wasn't anything that talked about it, was there anything else that inspired you to specialize in that?
I think the challenge is I'm a researcher by nature. So I've got a PhD. I love to dive into things. And I was like, why is this overlooked? And is the advice really different? And that's what I've been working on for the past 4 years is trying to figure this out. And the answer is it changes just about everything in your financial plan, but there's a lot of assumptions in there. So if you go and, look at any financial planning software, you look at the education, they all assume you're following the standard life script. The standard life script is the one that says you go to school, you get married, you have kids, you retire, pass to my next generation. It's so ingrained that I live here in Tennessee. They're teaching that in schools as they call it the success sequence. So it's required education. Well, what happens is if you are not following that script, it changes just about everything about your life, financial plan, your tax plan, your estate plan, everything. But it's not discussed. It's such an issue that we call it, the fiduciary void. Like, how do I find good fiduciary advice that reflects the life I'm living? And it's hard.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So Tell us a little bit about some of the unique financial planning considerations for people who are child free.
So I think the first step is as a child free person, you actually have to plan for your life first, then your finances, which sounds a little weird, but what it is, for child free folks, we don't have like this set path we need to be on. So if you look at most of the people I've worked with, they don't want to pass on money to this generation. Like it's not a priority. Yeah, I'll pass on money to my nephews, but it's not, my number one goal. Also, child free people as a whole don't really want to retire in the classic. They want to find something they enjoy to work and do across your life. Well, if you're not going to retire and you're not going to pass the money to the next generation, there's a lot of assumptions that change in there. And then the question is, well, what are you going to do? So in my book, the Child Free Guide to Life and Money, the first half's all about figuring out what life you want to live. And then the second half is about figuring out your finances because it's not as linear or simple as a standard plan.
Interesting. So tell me more about that. Is it mainly because they're working longer or they're not planning on retiring or what else is there that is different?
Well, even if we start with the basics. So if you look at child free folks, about one third will never marry. And that's opposed to 2.5% of parents. So you have a huge difference in family structures. Um, and in actuality, when clients come to me and they go, "Hey, should we get married?" My first question is, "Do you need health care?" And they go, "No." Well, then you might not need to get married. Like there's a big discussion there. So, all right, you're not going to get married. That might change things. You might have a spouse. You might not be married. You might be in a group. You might be in whatever structure. That changes the start of your structure. Well, if you're going to be one of the one third of the US, one third of the child free population in the US that are soloists, that's single with no kids, how does that change your finances? There's actually a study out of Fidelity that looked at this and found that it costs somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million extra across your life in single tax, where you can't split the rent, you can't split the utilities, you can't split all that other stuff. You have this extra cost. And then we always get as child free people this core question like, well, but who's going to take care of you when you're older? And it's kind of a question I have a love hate thing with. And what I hate about it is there's a lot of assumptions in there. The data actually doesn't back up that your kids will take care of you when you're older. Just reality check. But what happens is there's an assumption that if you have kids, they will. Well, we don't have that assumption. So we have to figure out our plans for long term care, estate planning, all that much earlier because the system is all based on you having a next of kin.
Right. And even if you're younger and you're not married and you don't have or sorry, if you're younger and you're not married but you have a partner, the legal documents are even more important because if something does happen to you, they need to have the right to make decisions for you and take care of your things. So tell us about how that works.
Yeah, I had somebody for my first book, Portraits of Child Free Wealth, that she was 50 and she had just finished her parents' paperwork, power of attorney, executor, will, all that fun stuff, and had joked with her spouse, "Hey, we got to get this done." Now, they weren't legally married. He died at 50 without any paperwork. Well, to the healthcare system, that person that she'd been living with her whole life and, bought a house with all that was nobody. Like, they're like, "Yep, you're a nice friend, but I'm not going to listen to you," which actually ended up with giant issues as she tried to like finish his estate because he didn't have a will, like all of this. Where what I say for child free people is you must get in place an estate plan. And it's not about your assets. Yeah, it technically, your will says what happens to your assets, but the bigger question is like, who makes decisions for you? Who's your medical power attorney? Who's your financial power attorney? Who's your executor trustee? And if you don't appoint somebody, the courts will make the decisions for you, which I don't think anybody wants. It doesn't really matter what your political bent is. Like, nobody wants the government making personal decisions for you. They don't know you. So you have to put that in paper. It's great if you have a spouse or somebody you can count on to do that. But if you don't, it's a big challenge to figure out whose name to put down in that space. It's a problem that I've been working on it for about 3 years on that particular problem. And I went around talking to pretty much everybody I could find to try to figure out a solution. It turns out in California or Arizona, you can appoint a professional fiduciary to serve in those roles for you, which is great. That's somebody you can say will be your power of attorney, be there for you. In the other 48 states, they don't have a similar system. And this causes a problem Because if I don't have next of kin and I don't have a spouse to rely on, or even if I do have a spouse, but you know what? I don't really want to put that burden on them. Who can I appoint? And it turns out, you can get trust companies can do this, but trust companies will only do it if you have millions of dollars. This is kind of how the system works. And if you're trying to like wind down your wealth, or die with zero when you die, hey, you're a terrible client for a trust company. They don't really want you, but they can do it. Well, what we did is we launched a service we call Childfree Trust, and what we provide we call life and legacy stewardship. We serve as child-free people's medical power attorney, financial power attorney, executor, and trustee. We help them create their estate documents, and then we create what we call care documents that outline everything about you. Like, for example, my wife and I get a car crash. The question is who makes our medical decisions, who makes our financial decisions, and who lets our dog out? Which sounds silly, but my wife's gonna be more worried about our dog than she is me, I swear. Like, she tells me she wouldn't, but I know the truth. But, like, that's the type of things that kids would normally do that you need to figure out a system to take care of for you.
Right. That's big because what does happen if you're both in a car accident? Um, my father was in a car accident and he never went home again. He's been in hospitals in long-term care and in a condo for a while, but if I wasn't there, I have no idea what would have happened. Like what would have happened to all of his stuff? Who would have taken care of his things? Who would have taken care of his money and his bills? I mean, it just is it's really a question. Like you just never know when that's going to happen and you need someone to step in. And even if you're a couple, like you said, what if you're together and it happens and then you both are incapacitated for a while, right? So, I love that you've set this up. Now, you mentioned that California has something that allows it, and you set up this trust. Does your trust work in all states, or are you only licensed to do things in certain states? How does that work?
Yeah, we partnered with a trust company so that we could have a nationwide solution. So, the California Arizona solution is a specific um, thing for professional fiduciaries. That's their own thing. Trust companies can still work in there. That's a different thing. We actually, in the community, there's a community of solo aging practitioners, and they call it fiduciary envy. Like we all wish all the states had something like California or like Arizona, which feels a little weird, but it is. So our way of getting around it at the national level is work with a trust company. It was kind of fun. We had to hire a team of legal interns for a summer to just look at every one of the 50 states. What are the weirdness around their rules? How do we create the documents to work? How do we do this? It's actually quite the challenge. And the issue is, hey, you move state by state. You had a great solution in California. You move to Oregon. You got to change it all, and you don't have somebody. So we had to create a nationwide solution to work for child-free people.
That's so interesting. So, do you have representatives in each state, or you just have
So here's
okay,
how it works. Yeah, we have a partner trust company. We are not the trust company ourselves. Child-free trust is the system that you get to. It's the way I explain it, it's kind of like your 401k. You have the plan administrator, and then you have like a trust company that holds the assets. Well, the trust company behind the scenes does this. And what we do is we have 24/7 emergency response. So there's a call center, call up, you give all your friends a copy of your emergency number, which is ours. You say, hey, child free trust that people reach out to for this. We get a call from a hospital, middle of the night, immediately verify who you are, verify the hospital, send them a copy of your power of attorney. We also send them a copy of your medical history that you've shared with us. Cause like, it's not enough to know, here's your power of attorney. It's like, are you allergic to penicillin? Which sounds silly, but that's a really big issue or whatever else it may be. We share all information and then we activate as the medical power attorney, financial power attorney to do all the rest of the care documents. So, for example, hey, yes, we'll get back in contact with the hospital and be your power attorney. But then what we do is look at your care doc and says, oh, yeah, you have a dog and your dog sitter is so and so. We're going to call your dog sitter and say, hey, you need to let the dog out first thing in the morning. We're not literally going to be the ones there letting your dog out, but we're going to be the ones kind of the quarterback for the system in making that happen. You pick what care you want, we execute on it.
great. So, I know that a lot of the listeners are probably thinking, well, how do you know what I want in my medical care?
Mhm.
So tell me more about how you gather that information, because I am familiar with a similar service. But tell me how you gather that information so that they know that you're making the decisions that they would want made.
Yep. So our system has kind of two parts. One is the estate planning documents. That's the legal ones that check off the box. Unfortunately, those don't really give you a lot of detail. They're kind of like this person makes the decisions. That's it. Our other half of our system is what we call care documents. So let me go to an extreme case and talk about long term care. Everybody's kind of worried about, well, who's going to take care of my older? How am I do that? And the answer, you specify. Now, people go, well, but I don't know what I want. Well, that's a different question. We will hire somebody as an aging care manager to do that for you. That is somebody who is, the local to the area, knows the area, is an expert in it. Tend to be either social workers or nurses who are an expert in this. Well, ideally, we would like you to actually meet with that person beforehand, pick who you want, pick what facility you want, pick what care you want, and share that with us. As much information as you give us, it'll outline, hey, this is what we need to do. If we don't have that, we'll go by our default choices. But the problem is there's so many different nuances of what you like, what you care about that we need to know. And I'll give you a silly example. I was on a podcast and a guy said, hey, his mom's 90, she's in a nursing home, and she loves chips. And the nurses would not give her chips because they're not on her diet. He's like, just give her the damn chips. Like, seriously. But his question was to me, who makes sure I get my chips? Which sounds ridiculous, but no, those are the things that matter. You tell us you want chips, we'll make sure you get chips, but you have to give us the information. What we do in the system is we do quarterly, we ask you, hey, anything changed, anything you need to update? You can update it anytime. You're like, hey, I'm on vacation in Maine for the next 2 months. Update the system, tell us you brought the dog with you. Um, and then once a year, we do require you to attest, hey, nothing's changed. Because, for example, you move different states, you might need different estate paperwork or, added a new pet or, had a new medical issue. It's only as good as the information that you're willing to share with us.
That makes sense. And so what about if you're in an accident and you're hospitalized and you need to make a decision like, do I keep the person on life support? Do I pull the plug? Who do I need to call? I mean, you have all of that information that the person's wishes.
Yeah, the proverbial pull the plug question is always the one people get to. And interestingly enough, your medical power of attorney, usually, kind of your healthcare directives, has that basic information. Do you want to be on the machines or not? I worked as a paramedic for a year. I worked in healthcare for years. Really, that kind of those life or death decisions, most of those are in the documents themselves, which ideally you have given to your primary care doc and they uploaded to the electronic system. If not, we send it to them. But then it becomes the question like, well, who do I notify? Do I want a funeral? Do I want to get buried? Whatever it is, you give us all that and we follow it. And we've been working on this question on like what matters to child-free people and the question we've been asking about legacy and what do you want? And it's interesting. We're doing a survey on this right now. I've got like 400 responses and probably a third to a half of them are just like, I don't want a legacy. I don't even want an obituary. I just want like to go. Great. We'll do that. Others are like, I had somebody wants to throw a massive party. Great. We'll throw a massive party. It's whatever you specify.
And so how many people are involved with the Child Free Trust? Like, what if something happens to you?
Yeah. So the first thing to keep in mind is the reason why we work with trust companies is they're designed to outlive everybody. I'm actually the first client for Child Free Trust. This company has to be able to bury me, hopefully in 40 or 50 years. You never know. But it has to be able to do that. So part of the nature of trust companies is they are they are run by the banking administrator in the state. This one's actually out of Alabama, the company we work with. It's an independent trust company. And they're required to have a rather sizable amount of capital hanging around, millions of dollars, just in case they go under. Because the way it works is the banking administrators take on that responsibility of executing if the trust company goes under. So it's like a backup to the backup. Now, the banking administrator is not literally going to do it. They're going to pay another trust company to do it. It's kind of how it works. But what I like about working with an independent trust company is it's regulated by the bank administrator, but it's not a bank. So what that means is you look at like last year we had all those banks go under. Well, that's because they were either making bad investments or bad loans. Trust companies can't do that. They don't take loans. They don't make loans. They have very strict rules. They're designed to outlive us. The entire entity is designed to do that. Now, could something happen? I don't know. Nothing's perfect, but it is by nature the design to live in perpetuity that matters.
That makes sense. Because I've heard of people there being people that will do this before.
Mhm.
They set up a business and this is their business, but it's just the person. So then what
Yeah.
happens if something happens to the person?
It,
Okay,
it,
so that makes sense. I have a question.
yep.
If if you only work with child-free people,
Mhm.
because I feel like there's a need too sometimes when maybe you have, like, especially for a medical directive, right? Where you have someone who has a spouse that maybe doesn't want to make the decision, or the spouse and the kids don't agree on the decision. Is there a possibility to name the child free trust as like a secondary so that the first person can step down and have a neutral third party make decisions based on the wishes of the person and the documents at hand?
Yeah. So the question's got two parts. The first is we only serve child free people. And the definition we're using is that you have no living, adopted, or biological children. Okay. So your children could have passed, you would still be considered child free, or you never had any. And that's intentional because what happens is as soon as you have kids, the complexity from a legal standpoint it's through the roof. It really is. And our system was specifically designed for child free people. Now, the way it works is you can list us as the first person or the last person. We're always going to be the last name on the list. Like if everybody else says, nope, I don't want to do it. And the example you gave was almost exact of what somebody said to us. We're doing these webinars talking to people like, look, here's what I want. I want my spouse to be listed first, but I may want to just pass this off to the trust company, to the fiduciary to make decisions so I can just be there to be their spouse. And I was like, yes, like that is the way. You can at any time say, yep, I'm going to pass this off to the next person. You can also voluntarily go into power of attorney. So, for example, we had folks, a lot of child free people travel internationally. Like, hey, I'm going to be traveling for the next 2 years. I want you to be my financial power of attorney and handle everything for me in the US while I'm overseas wandering the world. Great. No problem.
Hmm, interesting. So you serve a lot of different purposes then. It's not just in the event of an event. So you can help with things in regular life too.
It, it's, if you really think about it, like that next of kin, the kids, whatever it is, all those things that family members would have done. If you don't have that next of kin, you don't have that person you rely on, we have to fill that blank. Like
Right.
in the system, if you look at the overall estate planning system, it always assumes you have somebody else. And if you don't, it's the government. And by the way, I mean, let's be real. If you've done a will, the government will try to find your next of kin, but they don't look too hard because they get the money if they don't find somebody. Like it's kind of a broken system. But what happens is there's so many things you don't think about that need to get handled. And I use the pets as an example. But like, hey, how do I make sure your apartment's locked up? How do I make how do I make sure your plants are watered? Like whatever matters to you. And those are the types of things we do, both in emergency and when you need us.
Yeah, that's a lot of things that a lot of people don't think about, right? The plants, the dogs, whatever, all the little things that you need to take care of. I mean, maybe you're even taking care of an elderly parent and you need to be sure that the elderly parent is taken care of.
Well, yeah, we actually we have a part of our financial planning process we call plan for parents. Our child free folks aren't parents, and the plan is really their parents.
Right.
Well, it is a big issue, and I think what happens is once you see kind of all the pieces that need to get done, it kind of freaks you out because it's a lot of stuff that you need to worry about. And what we have is before our solution existed, people would just go, "Well, I got no answer." And I had folks emailing me, I went out to all of them, tried to trust companies, talked to everybody, trying to get people to do this service. They didn't want to do it. People email me all across the country like, hey, I'm 70 something. I'm super worried. Who's going to take care of this for me? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? And you see these cases and it just pulls your heartstrings. I had somebody recently reach out and she had to get an elective surgery done. And she went to get the surgery done and they asked, hey, who's your emergency contact? She's like, I don't have one. And so they kind of go back and forth, well, how about, your nephew, your kids, whatever. And none of that. And they actually canceled the surgery because she couldn't put an emergency contact down. I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
well, think about it from the hospital standpoint. They're like, who do we call? We got nobody. Like
Yeah.
now in emergencies, they will act, but in the kind of this kind of elective thing, they have that opportunity. Like it's things like that that people don't think of that, it's this problem that the whole system is what you should have done and you're breaking it. And we have to figure out a way around it.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So I want to move on to the mindset part
Mm.
of being child free, because every niche has their own little mindset obstacles and things that hold them back. So can you tell me what some of the most common mindset blocks are or internal obstacles you see with working with child free clients?
Yeah. The biggest one is this fight with the standard life script that says you got to do things. So let me give you an example. A lot of child free folks will come to us and go, okay, when can I retire? And then I'll usually ask them the next question is, do you want to retire? And I'm amazed how many times they say no. And then I'm like, well, then why are you asking me about retirement? And they're like, well, because that's what I'm supposed to do. This is those shoulds again. And I'm like, well, but if that's not what you enjoy, why would you do it? Where we talk about financial plans live early instead of financial plans retire early, where it's more like dialing back work, finding work you enjoy, doing it across your life. It changes the way you look at it. But there's so many things that say what you should do or must do to get there. And I'll give you another example. A lot of folks will reach out and say, hey, I need to know if I can buy a house or if I should buy a house. And I go, well, do you think you'll be there in the next 5 to 7 years? And their answer is usually no. I'm like, then don't buy a house. Our default answer for child free people is to rent. They're like, yeah, but my dad says I got to buy property. And by the way, I don't know why it's always dad, but throw dad on the bus. And we get to a point with our clients where we will ask them, whose voice is in your head saying you got to do that? And it's never their own. Our goal, we always want to make finances simple so your life can be amazing, whatever that takes. Well, that is not, hey, I want to own 6 properties and be a landlord if I'm going to travel the world. Those two just don't go together. But it's this conflict between what is your script and what society says you have to do.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I talk about that too in people listening to their parents, and their parents, my dad always told me this in financial planning. It's like, well, you're not living in the same time period. Your life is not the same at all, regardless of whether you have kids or not. It's still not your story. So I love that you brought that same dad thing up. And I think we're both throwing dad under the bus all the time, but it could be anybody. It's whoever they respect and look up to that they're listening to, right?
It is. And it's interesting because turns out about 80% of our clients have never worked with a financial planner. And part of that is because they've gotten bad advice. And, one of the things I tell everybody you're child free, I said, if you're going to work with a financial planner, be sure to ask them how your plan is different because you're child free. If the planner says, hey, you'll change your mind, just walk away. If they're like, hey, it's not different, once again, walk away. But one of the interesting things that happens is people will inherit some money or whatever, and they'll inherit their parents' financial planner. And I had somebody to tell about it, like, yep, my dad died, happened to be a dad, and the incomes, all these suits hanging out here trying to tell me what to do. And she's like, none of them talked to me, understood me. They were all just trying to tell me what my dad wanted them to, wanted to hear. And like, this is not for me. And I'm like, that's the point. Find a planner, find somebody to work with that specializes in serving people like you, that understands you, that can help you through it, rather than just trying to say, well, you inherited dad's money, so you got to inherit dad's financial plan.
Right, because everything changes. You're a completely different person, you have a completely different lifestyle. Everything changes. The whole entire plan changes. And I think that's one of the things in working with clients that do inherit money is a lot of times there's a lot of emotion attached to the investments that they have, and letting go of that and changing the plan, because this is what dad wanted, this is what dad liked, even if it doesn't fit their plan. And that's a whole nother podcast episode.
I had somebody who inherited a whole bunch of oil stock, and I'm going to not pick the name, a whole bunch of oil stock from their grandmother. And now this person who inherited it was 100% kind of on the ESG, save the world. And we're like, all right, so we're going to sell all this stock and do all this and change it. And there was that moment like, well, but that's what grandma picked. And I'm like, yes, but it doesn't match your values. And it's that hard part of that. I think the
Yeah.
other one on the inheritance side, kind of just want to think through, if you go kind of the standard inheritance route, often we'll see folks that are inheriting money and it'll have a generation skipping trust. Well, if you have a generation skipping trust and you're child free, it causes a big issue. There's no generation to skip to. So I've had folks where, all right, they get the income and their kids in the trust get the principal. Yeah, what happens when you're not? And it's actually become a big issue for the courts to figure out how do they fix that, because you're not really meant to change trusts documents unless there's like a trust protector or a few other things. But there is no other generation. It's an interesting area.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so we're getting into some really complicated stuff here that we don't have time to go deep into, but like I said, whole nother podcast episode there. But if you were going to give one thing to a child-free listener that they could do to strengthen their financial plan, what would that be?
The answer is really make your own plan. Don't don't follow somebody else's. And that first step is kind of make sure it matches your goals, not other people's goals. And that is that question about what do you want your life to look like? I often say to my clients, what do you want to be when you grow up? That has nothing to do with age. Like, just what do you want to do? And what we find is when we do that, we'll find that they are following the good boy, good girl path, like what I should do. And I'm like, and that doesn't match you. The key is to have it match you. The actual finances, really simple. I'm a simple, passive, long-term investor, 3-fund portfolio, set and forget it. You don't have to do anything fancy there, but it does have to match you.
And so what would you want a child-free person to know when thinking about their future?
I think when you look at your future, the people start worrying about kind of like the end, the long-term care side, all that. You need to have a plan for it, and when you look at that, currently there's a bunch of cuts going on Medicaid. Medicaid pays for about 2/3 of long-term care in the United States. That's getting cut. That funding is not reliable. Where I will have child-free folks, my goal is by mid-40s, put together a plan for their long-term care, which means either, setting aside money to self-insure or buying a long-term care insurance policy. But we're doing mid-40s. People are like, well, but, others wait until 60s. And I'm like, you can't. You don't have a backup net. And with Medicaid getting cut, you don't have that backup. You need to figure out your plan and then make sure somebody's there to execute on it.
Great advice. Great advice. Okay, so in the beginning, I mentioned your books. So tell us a little bit about the two books that you have.
So the Portrait of Child-Free Wealth are stories of child-free people and what their life is like, which part of the reason I did that was just so people can go, huh, I'm not so weird. Like just to see it out there. And then the Child Free Guide to Life and Money is that life and financial planning guide of like, how do I actually do this? First half is all about your life. The second half is about your finances. We have a program in there we call the 8 No Baby Steps. I'm here in Nashville, just down the road from Dave Ramsey with his 7 baby steps. So we had to have a little fun with that. And it walks you through, all right, get out of debt, get out of budget. That's all good for everybody. But then the specific things like saving towards your goals, figuring out long-term care, things like disability insurance is really important to child-free people. Life insurance, not so much. It walks you through everything down to, hey, how do you wind down your wealth and give to charities? If you want to give to charities, it's a whole lot better to do that while you're alive because then you get the tax breaks than after you die.
Great, great. And so tell us where people can find the books and where they can find you.
Books are everywhere. Our website is childfreetrust.com, childfreewealth.com, and we're childfree wealth on all the socials except for Twitter.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and appreciate the conversation, Jay.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Real Money, Real Life. Want to see what's blocking you from financial confidence or discover your money personality? Head to the resources page at lindagriz.com for our free quizzes. That's LINDAGRIZ.com/resources. If you're loving what you're learning, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. I'm your Me Money Guide to Financial Clarity, Linda Grizzly, and I'll catch you next time as we talk more real money, real life, because you deserve to feel confident with your money and good about how you spend it. The content shared here is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not financial, tax, legal, or planning advice and does not constitute therapy or mental health counseling. Please consult an actively licensed and qualified professional for advice or help specific to your situation.